Have you ever felt like a piece of your soul was lost forever, buried in the ashes of a past you can't escape? What if one day, just by chance, you stumbled upon a fragment of that lost life, something or someone you thought you'd never see again? How far would you go to reclaim what was once yours, even if it meant facing the ghosts you've been running from? In the heart of small-town America, where the stars and stripes flutter on every front porch, and the smell of barbecue wafts through the air on lazy summer evenings, there's a man who walks with a weight no one can see. His name is John Carver, a 42-year-old veteran of the Afghanistan War, a man whose hazel eyes hold storms that never quite settle. He moves through the streets of Willow Creek, Ohio, with a slight limp in his left leg, a souvenir from an IED that nearly took more than just his mobility. His weathered hands, calloused from years of gripping rifles and reins, now tremble slightly as he pours his morning coffee at the local diner, where the waitress Marla always saves him a seat by the window. He's a regular, but not the kind who chats about the weather or the Buckeyes' latest game. John's a quiet man, the kind whose silence speaks louder than words, a silence carved from memories of desert sand, barked commands, and the deafening roar of loss. Every morning, John wakes before the sun, not because he wants to, but because the nightmares won't let him linger in sleep. He pulls on his faded army jacket, the olive-green fabric worn thin at the elbows, and steps outside his small rental house on the edge of town. The air is crisp, tinged with the scent of pine from the nearby woods, and the distant hum of a tractor reminds him of a simpler life he's no longer a part of. He walks past the American Legion Hall, where old-timers salute him with a nod, recognizing the invisible scars of a soldier, but he keeps his head down. He's not one for their stories or their beer, not anymore. Instead, he heads to the same places every day: Miller's Hardware for odd jobs, the diner for black coffee, and sometimes the VA clinic for pills he doesn't always take. His routine is a fragile scaffolding, holding up a life that feels like it's one strong wind away from collapsing. There's a hollowness in him, a void where something or someone used to be. It's in the way he lingers by the dog park on Main Street, watching retrievers and labs chase after tennis balls, his gaze distant, as if he's searching for a shadow that isn't there. It's in the worn leather collar tucked away in a drawer back home, a keepsake he can't bear to look at, but can't throw away either. Willow Creek is the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where the 4th of July parade is the biggest event of the year, complete with fire trucks blaring and kids waving tiny flags. It's a town of red, white, and blue, of church picnics and Friday night football games under floodlights. But for John, it's just a backdrop, a place to exist, not to live. He's been back from deployment for 6 years, but a part of him never left the Helmand province. The hum of a low-flying helicopter can still send his heart racing, and the crack of a firecracker on Independence Day makes him instinctively duck for cover. He tries to blend in, to be just another guy fixing fences or raking leaves for neighbors who call him a good fella, without ever really knowing him. But the truth is, he's haunted, not by the faces of enemies, but by the ones he couldn't save: comrades, civilians, and one bond so deep it cuts straight to his core. He doesn't talk about it, not even to the therapist at the VA who scribbles notes while he stares at the wall. Some wounds don't bleed, but they ache just the same. On this particular Tuesday, with the late autumn leaves swirling in the Ohio wind and the sky a heavy gray threatening rain, John's routine takes a detour. He's out of coffee filters, a small annoyance that feels like a personal slight in a life already full of them. He decides to swing by the strip mall on Route 42, a stretch of asphalt lined with dollar stores, a Taco Bell, and a pet shop called Paws and Claws. He's been in there once or twice, not to buy anything, just to look, to stand among the yipping puppies and the lazy cats in their cages, to breathe in the scent of kibble and fur, to feel for just a moment something other than the cold emptiness that's taken root inside him. It's not something he'd admit to anyone, not even himself, but those brief visits are a balm, a reminder of a time when loyalty wasn't just a word, but a living, breathing presence at his side. He pushes open the glass door, the bell jingling overhead like a memory he can't quite place, and steps into the fluorescent-lit space. The clerk, a young woman with a nose ring and a bright "howdy" on her lips, barely glances up from her phone. John doesn't mind. He's not here for conversation. He's here for the quiet comfort of paws tapping against cage floors, of eyes that don't judge. He wanders past the aquariums bubbling with neon fish, past shelves stacked with chew toys and flea collars, his boots scuffing softly on the linoleum. His hands are shoved deep in his jacket pockets, shoulders hunched like he's bracing for something he can't name. He stops by a pen of golden retriever puppies, their clumsy paws tripping over each other as they wrestle for a squeaky toy. A faint ghost of a smile tugs at the corner of his mouth, but it's gone as quickly as it came. He's about to turn away to head back out into the grey day with nothing but the weight he carried in, when something stops him cold. It's not a sound, not at first, but a feeling. A pull, like a thread tugged at the edge of his memory. Then he hears it. A low, familiar whine. A sound that cuts through the chatter of the shop like a knife through silence. It's coming from the far corner, where the older dogs, the ones not as shiny or marketable, are kept in larger kennels. John's breath catches in his throat, his chest tightening as if someone's just clamped a vice around his ribs. He moves toward the sound, each step heavier than the last, the air around him growing thick with something he can't yet name. He reaches the kennel, a chain-link enclosure with a faded blanket on the floor, and there, staring back at him through the wire, is a pair of eyes he'd know anywhere. Deep brown, soulful, scarred over the left brow from a shrapnel graze, a mark John remembers as clearly as his own reflection. The dog, a lean, battle-worn German shepherd with a coat of black and tan, stands slowly, its ears perking as that whine escapes again, softer now, almost disbelieving. John's knees buckle slightly, his hand reaching out to grip the kennel door for support, the cold metal biting into his palm. He reads the tag taped to the cage, and the world tilts under his feet. Max. Age 9. Former military working dog. Available for adoption. Max. His Max. The dog who'd been by his side through every patrol, every ambush, every sleepless night in the Afghan desert. The dog who'd sniffed out danger, who'd taken a hit to protect him, who'd been more than a partner, more like a brother. The dog John had been forced to leave behind when the army deemed Max no longer fit for service after that last brutal deployment. The dog he'd been told was gone, reassigned or retired, lost to a system that didn't care about the bonds forged in war. John's eyes burn, a lump rising in his throat so fast he can barely swallow it down. How could Max be here, in a pet shop in nowhere, Ohio, waiting for a stranger to claim him like he's just another pound pup? How could the universe be this cruel and this kind, all at once? He kneels down, his bad leg protesting, and presses his forehead against the kennel wire, close enough to feel the warmth of Max's breath through the gaps. The dog presses back, a soft, desperate nudge, as if he's been waiting for this moment as long as John has. For the first time in years, John feels the dam inside him crack, emotions he's buried under layers of numbness threatening to spill over. But with that flood comes a question, sharp and urgent, cutting through the haze of reunion. How did Max end up here? And what, or who, stands between John and taking him home? John stayed there, forehead pressed against the cold kennel wire, his breath hitching in uneven gasps as Max's warm, familiar nudge seemed to pierce straight through the years of numbness he'd built up. His hands trembled, gripping the metal so tightly his knuckles whitened, as if letting go might mean losing Max all over again. The pet shop's sterile hum faded into a distant buzz. All he could hear was the soft, pleading whine from the German shepherd, a sound that dragged him back to dusty Afghan trails, to nights under a sky torn by tracer rounds, to a bond he'd thought was severed forever. His chest felt like it was caving in, a deep ache unfolding where he'd long buried any hope of reunion. This wasn't just a dog. This was Max, his shield, his shadow, the one living thing that had kept him sane when the world was nothing but chaos and loss. And now here he was behind a flimsy cage in Willow Creek, Ohio, reduced to a price tag and a faded blanket. Tears burned at the edges of John's eyes, but he clenched his jaw, fighting them back. He wasn't ready for this, hadn't been ready for anything since the day he'd limped off that transport plane 6 years ago, leaving half his soul in the desert. Guilt clawed at him, sharper than the shrapnel scar on Max's brow. He'd failed him. He'd left him behind, hadn't fought hard enough when the brass told him Max was done, hadn't tracked him down when they said he'd been reassigned. John had believed them, had let himself believe it was over, because the alternative, wondering, searching, hoping, hurt too damn much. Now seeing Max's weary frame, the grey dusting his muzzle, the way his once sharp eyes seemed dulled by time, John felt the weight of every day they'd been apart. What had Max gone through? Where had he been while John was drowning in diner coffee and silence? The questions churned, each one a fresh cut, bleeding out a anger he couldn't direct at anyone but himself. He pulled back slightly, just enough to look at Max fully, to take in the slight tremble in his hind legs, the way his tail gave a hesitant wag, cautious, like he wasn't sure if this was real either. John's throat tightened, his voice breaking before he even got the words out. "Hey, buddy," he whispered, barely audible, the sound raw and jagged. "I'm sorry, I'm so damn sorry." Max tilted his head, ears twitching at the familiar tone, and let out a low, rumbling bark, a sound John hadn't heard in years, one that used to mean safety, trust, home. It hit him like a punch, cracking the dam he'd built around his heart even further. He wanted to rip the kennel door off its hinges, to pull Max into his arms and never let go. But the reality of that little tag, available for adoption, loomed like a wall between them. Someone else could take him. Someone else could walk in, sign a paper, and erase this moment. The thought made his stomach twist, a visceral fear he hadn't felt since the last time he'd seen Max disappear into a military transport, out of his reach. The clerk's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts, sharp and oblivious. "Hey, sir, you okay over there? Need help with anything?" John didn't turn, couldn't tear his eyes from Max, but he managed a gruff, "I'm fine," even as his voice betrayed the lie. He heard her footsteps hesitate, then retreat, her phone clicking, resuming a moment later. He was alone again with Max, but not really, because now there was a new barrier, a ticking clock he could feel in his bones. He had to act, had to do something, but what? His VA disability checks barely covered rent and the occasional repair job, adoption fees, vet bills, the life Max deserved. Could he even afford it? And worse, what if there was more to this? What if Max being here wasn't just a cruel twist of fate, but something darker, something tied to the system that had torn them apart in the first place? The pet shop door jingled again, and John's shoulders tensed, his old instincts kicking in, scanning for threats even in a place as mundane as paws and claws. A middle-aged man in a flannel shirt and jeans walked in, a little girl skipping at his side, her pigtails bouncing as she pointed at the puppy pen John had lingered by earlier. "Daddy, can we get one? Please." Her voice was bright, carefree, everything John's world wasn't. The man chuckled, a warm, easy sound, and for a moment John envied him, envied the simplicity of a life where a dog was just a pet, not a lifeline, not a ghost. He turned his gaze back to Max, his heart pounding harder now, the fear of losing him again mixing with a growing, restless anger. Whoever had put Max here, whoever had let him end up in a kennel instead of a proper home, had to answer for it. He didn't know how or why, but he felt it, a certainty that this wasn't random. Someone had failed Max, just like someone had failed him, and the thought stoked a fire he hadn't felt in years. He stood slowly, ignoring the ache in his bad leg, and reached into his pocket for his phone. His hands were still shaky, but he managed to snap a quick photo of Max through the wire, of the tag on the kennel, anything that could anchor this moment to reality. Then he turned, forcing himself to walk to the counter where the clerk was scrolling through Instagram, oblivious to the storm brewing in the man before her. "This dog," John said, his voice low, controlled but threaded with something dangerous. "The German Shepherd, Max. How'd he get here?" The clerk blinked, setting her phone down with a small shrug. I don't know. We get a lot of dogs from shelters, some from private surrenders. He came in a couple weeks ago, I think. Manager's got the paperwork if you want to know more. Why? You interested?" Her tone was casual, transactional, and it grated on John like sandpaper. Interested, as if Max were a used car or a clearance item. He forced a nod, keeping his temper in check. "Yeah, I am. When's the manager in?" "Not till tomorrow. You can come back or call, I guess, but, if you want to adopt, you gotta fill out an app and pay the fee. We don't hold dogs without a deposit." Her words landed like stones, each one piling onto the weight already crushing him. A deposit, paperwork. Hurdles he wasn't sure he could clear, not with his finances, not with the state of his life. But walking away wasn't an option. Not again. He muttered a thanks and turned back to Max, his mind racing. Tomorrow. He had until tomorrow to figure this out, but even that felt like too long. What if someone else came in before then? What if Max was gone by morning? As he knelt back down by the kennel, a memory surged unbidden, vivid and cruel. It was Helmand 2013, the air thick with dust and the metallic tang of blood. He and Max had been on patrol, moving through a narrow village street when the world exploded. The IED had been buried shallow, a cheap trap, but it had torn through their unit like a scythe. John had taken shrapnel to the leg, but Max had lunged, shoving him out of the worst of the blast, taking a hit to his side instead. John could still hear his yelp, sharp and panicked, could still feel the weight of Max's body as he dragged him to cover, shouting for a medic while gunfire rained down. They'd survived that day together, because of each other. But afterward, when the army said Max couldn't serve anymore, John had been powerless. He'd watched them load Max into a crate, promising himself it wasn't goodbye, that he'd find a way. He hadn't, and that failure had haunted him every day since. Now staring into Max's eyes, that memory wasn't just a ghost, it was a demand. He couldn't fail again, but the obstacles felt insurmountable, piling up faster than he could process. Money was one thing, but what if there were legal issues? What if the army still claimed ownership, or whoever had surrendered Max came back? And deeper, uglier doubts gnawed at him. Did he even deserve this? After all these years of running from his past, of letting himself crumble, was he really the best thing for Max? The dog deserved a real home, not a broken-down vet in a rented shack on the edge of town. But the thought of someone else taking him, of Max looking out from another stranger's yard, was unbearable. John's fists clenched at his sides, the old leather of his jacket creaking with the movement. He wasn't sure he could do this, but he knew he couldn't walk away. Leaving the pet shop felt like tearing off a piece of himself. Max's whine followed him as he pushed through the door, the bell jingling like a mocking echo of hope. The grey Ohio sky hung low, the threat of rain now a damp chill in the air as he trudged back to his truck in the strip mall lot. He didn't start the engine right away, just sat there, staring at the steering wheel, the photo of Max burning a hole in his phone. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. His first thought was the VA. Someone there might know something about military working dogs, about how Max could have slipped through the cracks. But the VA was a maze of red tape, and he didn't have time for forms and hold music. Then he remembered Marla, the waitress at the diner, who'd once mentioned her cousin worked at an animal rescue nearby. It was a long shot, but it was something. He started the truck, the engine rumbling to life, and headed toward downtown Willow Creek, past the American Legion Hall where the flag snapped in the wind, a vivid reminder of the oaths he'd taken and the ones he'd broken by letting Max go. At the diner, the lunch rush was thinning out, the clatter of dishes and murmur of conversation a familiar drone as John slid into his usual seat by the window. Marla spotted him right away, her apron streaked with ketchup, a tired smile crinkling her eyes as she poured him a coffee without asking. "Rough day, John," she said, her tone light but observant, picking up on the tension in his frame. "You could say that." He hesitated, fingers tracing the rim of the chipped mug, the heat grounding him. "Marla, you remember talking about your cousin, the one at the rescue? I need a favor. Found a dog today, means a lot to me. Need to know how he got to where he is." His voice was tight, the words costing more than he wanted to admit. Marla's brow furrowed, but she nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "Sure, I can call her." "What's the deal, lost pup of yours or something?" There was curiosity in her tone, but also a gentleness, the kind Willow Creek folk offered without prying too deep. "Something like that," John muttered, not ready to lay it all bare. "Just anything she can dig up. He's at Paws and Claws, name's Max. Used to be a military dog." The last part slipped out, heavy with meaning, and Marla's eyes softened with understanding. Small towns knew soldiers' stories, even the ones left unspoken. "I'll see what I can do. Hang tight." She disappeared behind the counter, pulling out her phone. while John stared out the window at Main Street, where kids rode bikes past the old courthouse, its flagpole a stark silhouette against the overcast sky. The heart of small-town America, red, white, and blue to the core, stared back at him, a symbol of everything he'd fought for and everything he'd lost in the process. He sipped the coffee, bitter on his tongue, and waited, each second stretching into eternity. When Marla returned, her expression was a mix of concern and confusion. She says she'll look into it, but it might take a day or two. Thing is, John, if he's a military dog, there could be weird rules like ownership stuff. And Paws and Claws, they're not exactly picky about where they get their animals. Could be a mess. Her words hung in the air, confirmation of the fears already swirling in his gut. A mess? That's what his life had been since the war, but this was different. This was Max. Thanks, Marla, he said, his voice quieter now, weighted with something she couldn't quite place. Means a lot. She nodded, patting his shoulder briefly, before moving to another table, leaving him with his thoughts and the cooling coffee. The idea of ownership stuff gnawed at him, stirring up old resentments toward the system that had chewed him up and spit him out. The army had taken Max once. He'd be damned if they or anyone else did it again. But how to fight that battle? He wasn't the man he'd been back then, full of fire and grit. He was tired, worn thin, a limp in his step and a quake in his hands. Still, for Max, he had to try. As the afternoon bled into evening, John drove home, the familiar pine scent of the woods near his rental house doing little to ease the storm inside him. He sat at his small kitchen table, the worn leather collar he'd kept all these years now in his hands, its metal tags dulled but still legible with Max's name and service number. He traced the letters, a ritual he hadn't allowed himself in months, each stroke a tether to a past he couldn't escape, and now didn't want to. Another memory hit, softer this time but just as piercing. The first night after Max was taken back at base, when John had lain awake in his bunk, the silence deafening without the familiar weight of Max at his feet. He'd cried then, alone in the dark, something he hadn't done since he was a kid. He didn't cry now, but the ache was the same, raw and unrelenting. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of the haze, an unknown number. He answered, wary, his voice a low growl. Yeah? John Carver. This is Linda, Marla's cousin. I got a quick update, but it ain't great. Her tone was brisk, professional, but there was an edge of unease. I pulled some strings, checked with a contact who deals with military dog adoptions. Your Max, he was supposed to be in a program for retired working dogs placed with a handler or family. But there's a glitch. Paperwork says he was lost in transit a year ago. No record of where he went after that until he popped up at Paws and Claws. Could be someone sold him under the table or worse. I'm sorry, John, but if you want him back, you're going to have to prove he's yours. And fast. There's already interest from another adopter. The words slammed into him, each one a fresh blow. Lost in transit. Sold. Interest from another adopter. His grip on the phone tightened, the plastic creaking under the strain. Prove he's mine? How the hell do I do that when the army wrote him off like he's nothing? His voice rose, anger spilling over, but Linda didn't flinch. Photos, service records, anything tying you two together, and you'll need money for legal help if it comes to that. I can send you some contacts, but John, I gotta be honest. Time's not on your side. That shop moves dogs quick. She paused, then added softer. I can tell this means a lot. Shall keep digging, okay? Thanks, he managed, the word barely a grunt before he hung up. Prove he's mine. The phrase echoed, a challenge and a wound all at once. He had photos, sure, buried in a box under his bed, grainy shots of him and Max in the desert, Max's head on his lap during downtime, the two of them side by side after a mission. But would that be enough against a faceless system? Or worse, someone else with a claim? And money? He didn't have it. Not for fees, not for lawyers, not for anything beyond the next month's rent. Despair crept in, cold and familiar, but it warred with a fiercer thing, determination. He couldn't lose Max again. He wouldn't. That night, sleep didn't come, not even the fitful kind haunted by nightmares. Instead, John sat on his sagging couch, the leather collar still in hand, staring at the dark window as rain finally began to patter against it. He thought of Max alone in that kennel, waiting, trusting just like he had in the war. The image burned, fueling a decision that had been forming since the moment he'd seen those familiar brown eyes again. He didn't know how, didn't know if he was enough, but he knew one thing. He was going back to Paws and Claws tomorrow, manager or not, deposit or not. He'd stand there, fight there, beg if he had to. Max wasn't just a dog, wasn't just a memory. He was the last piece of John that hadn't been shattered by war, the piece he needed to feel whole again. And as the rain picked up, drumming on the roof like distant artillery, John made his choice. He'd sell what he could, take any job, call in every favor. He'd dig through that box of photos, piece together every scrap of proof, even if it meant facing the past he'd run from for 6 years. He'd walk into that pet shop with everything he had, because walking away wasn't an option. Not this time. If you're feeling the weight of John's fight, the depth of this bond, hit that subscribe button to see how far he'll go to bring Max home. The battle's just beginning and it's going to tear your heart apart. Tomorrow he'd face whatever stood between them, be it money, laws, or the ghosts of his own failures. Tomorrow he'd fight for Max, no matter the cost. The morning broke over Willow Creek with a pale, hesitant light, the kind that seems unsure if it wants to chase away the night's shadows or just blend into them. John Carver hadn't slept, not really, just dozed in fits and starts on his sagging couch, the worn leather collar of Max still clutched in his hand like a lifeline. His eyes burned from exhaustion, his bad leg ached from the tension of a body that hadn't relaxed in hours, but none of that mattered. Today was the day. He'd made his choice in the dark hours under the drumming rain, and now as the first hints of dawn crept through his window, he felt a resolve harder than any he'd known since the war. He was going back to Paws and Claws, money or no money, answers or no answers. He'd stand there until they let him take Max, or until they dragged him out. Failure wasn't an option, not this time. He moved through his small rental house with a purpose that felt foreign after years of drifting. He dug through the box under his bed, pulling out old photos crinkled at the edges. Him and Max in the Afghan desert, Max's head resting on his boot during a rare, quiet moment, the two of them side by side after a mission, dust coating their skin and fur, but unable to hide the bond in their gaze. Each image was a shard of memory, cutting deep as he stacked them with trembling hands. He slipped them into a manila envelope along with Max's service tags, anything to prove their history, anything to show that this wasn't just a dog, but a piece of his soul. His phone buzzed with a text from Linda, Marla's cousin, saying she'd emailed him a contact for a low-cost legal aid group familiar with military dog cases. It wasn't much, but it was a thread to cling to. John didn't reply. He didn't have the words. Instead, he pulled on his faded army jacket, the olive green fabric a silent reminder of oaths taken and battles fought, and headed for his truck. The drive to the strip mall on Route 42 felt like a march into enemy territory, every mile ratcheting up the tension coiled in his chest. The air was damp from last night's rain, the Ohio sky a heavy gray that mirrored the storm inside him. His hands gripped the steering wheel too tight, knuckles whitening, as doubts gnawed at the edges of his resolve. What if the manager laughed him off? What if another adopter had already claimed Max? What if the system, that faceless, merciless machine that had torn them apart once, did it again? The thought made his stomach churn, a bitter mix of fear and rage, but beneath it was something stronger, a need so primal it drowned out everything else. He needed Max back, needed to right the wrong of leaving him behind, needed to feel whole again, even if just for a moment. When he pulled into the lot at Paws and Claws, the pet shop's neon sign flickered weakly, a sad contrast to the urgency burning in him. The bell jingled as he pushed through the door, the same clerk from yesterday glancing up from her phone with a bored, "Hey." John didn't acknowledge her, his eyes locking on the far corner, on Max's kennel. His heart lurched as he saw him there, still waiting, those deep brown eyes lifting to meet his with a recognition that cut straight through the years. Max let out a low whine, paws pressing against the wire as if he could push through it, and John felt his throat tighten, his breath hitching. He was still here, there was still time. But for how long? He turned to the clerk, his voice low and taut, every word measured to keep the emotion from spilling over. "Manager in yet?" She shrugged, popping her gum. Yeah, he's in the back. Want me to get him? John nodded, not trusting himself to say more, and moved to Max's kennel while she disappeared through a door behind the counter. He knelt down, ignoring the protest in his bad leg, and pressed his hand against the wire, feeling the warmth of Max's nose as it nudged back. "I'm here, buddy," he whispered, the words rough with a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. "I ain't leaving without you." "Not this time." Max's tail gave a slow, hopeful wag, but his eyes held a weariness that mirrored John's own, as if he too had been broken by the years apart, as if he too was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Footsteps approached, heavy and deliberate, and John stood, turning to face a stocky man in a polo shirt with paws and claws embroidered on the chest. The manager, a guy in his 50s with a patchy beard and a clipboard under his arm, sized John up with a look that was more annoyance than curiosity. "Heard you're asking about the shepherd," he said, tone flat. "What's the deal?" John's jaw tightened, his hands clenching at his sides as he fought to keep his voice steady. "His name's Max. He's mine. Was my partner in Afghanistan. Military working dog. I got proof, photos, tags, service history. I want to take him home." The manager's brow furrowed, but there was no warmth in his expression, just a businessman weighing liabilities. "Look, pal, I get it, but we got rules. That dog came to us through a third-party rescue, paperwork all legit. Adoption fees $300, plus vet clearance, plus an app process. And I gotta tell you, there's already someone else interested. They put down a deposit this morning." The words hit John like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that stole the air from his lungs. A deposit. Someone else. His vision narrowed, the fluorescent lights of the shop buzzing louder in his ears as a hot, reckless anger surged up. "A deposit," he repeated, voice rising despite himself. "You're telling me some stranger can just walk in and buy a piece of my life because they got cash? That dog saved me more times than I can count. He's not a damn commodity." The manager raised a hand, unfazed, his tone hardening. "I don't make the rules, man. I just follow 'em. You want him, you gotta pay and prove you're a fit owner. No exceptions. And I ain't got time for war stories, got a business to run. You got the fee or not?" John's fists balled tighter, the urge to slam them into something, anything, almost overpowering. $300. Might as well have been $3,000 for all he had in his account. His disability checks were stretched thin, barely covering rent and basics, and the odd jobs around Willow Creek didn't pay enough to bridge the gap. He wanted to scream, to tear the kennel open with his bare hands, to tell this guy exactly what Max meant, but he knew it wouldn't matter. Not to him, not to a system that saw dogs like Max as inventory, not heroes. His gaze flicked to Max, whose ears had drooped at the raised voices, and the sight of that quiet resignation broke something in John. He couldn't let this be the end. He wouldn't. "I'll get the money," he said finally, the words gritted out, each one tasting of desperation. "Just don't let him go till I'm back. I'll be back today, you hear me?" The manager shrugged, already turning away. "No promises without a deposit. First come, first served. Clock's ticking, bud." John stood there, rooted to the spot, as the man disappeared into the back again, the clerk's indifferent stare following him from the counter. The weight of it all pressed down, heavier than any ruck he'd carried in the desert. The money he didn't have, the time he didn't have, the fear that even if he fought with everything in him, it might not be enough. He turned back to Max, kneeling once more, his forehead resting against the cold wire as a shudder ran through him. "I'll fix this," he murmured, voice breaking. "I swear, I'll fix this. Just hold on for me." Max let out a soft huff, a sound of trust that John didn't feel he deserved, and it only made the ache in his chest sharper, the stakes higher. He was running out of time, and the tension twisted tighter, a vice around his heart, as he realized this might be the last moment he had with Max if he couldn't pull off a miracle. He left the shop in a daze, the bells jingle a cruel echo as he stumbled into the damp air of the parking lot. His truck waited, old and battered like him, but he didn't get in right away. Instead, he paced, boots scuffing against the asphalt, his mind racing for solutions. Sell something? What did he even have worth $300? His tools, maybe, but that was his livelihood for odd jobs. His jacket? No, too worn, too personal. He thought of the diner, of Marla, of anyone in Willow Creek who might loan him the cash, but pride and shame warred inside him at the idea of begging. He'd already lost so much: his strength, his purpose, his past. Asking for help felt like losing the last shred of who he'd been, but for Max, he'd swallow it. He'd crawl if he had to. His phone buzzed again, snapping him out of the spiral, and he fumbled to answer it, hoping against hope it was Linda with some magic fix. It was her, voice hurried but steady. "John, I got through to that legal aid group. They say if you've got documentation tying Max to you as his handler, you might have a case to claim ownership, even without military sign-off. But you gotta move fast. File a petition today and get that dog out before someone else finalizes adoption. They're emailing a template now, and I called a buddy at a local vet. They'll do a free checkup if you get Max out, cover the clearance cost. Can you handle the fee?" John's breath came out in a shaky rush, a lifeline thrown just as he felt himself sinking. I don't have it yet. Working on it. But I got the proof. Photos, tags, everything. I'm not letting him go, Linda. I can't." Her pause was heavy, understanding in the silence. "I know. Look, I'm wiring you $100. It's all I've got spare right now, but it's a start. Pay me back when you can. Just get him, John. Don't wait." The gesture floored him, a kindness he hadn't expected, hadn't known how to receive after years of shutting everyone out. His voice cracked as he managed a "thank you," the words inadequate for the weight they carried. He hung up, staring at the phone as if it held answers, then checked his email. The legal template was there, a jumble of legalese he barely understood, but clung to like a weapon. $100 from Linda, 200 more to find. Somehow. The clock was ticking louder now, every second a hammer against his resolve, every doubt a grenade waiting to detonate. He climbed into his truck, the engine rumbling to life, and headed for the diner. If there was ever a time to ask for help, it was now. Marla was behind the counter when he walked in, wiping down the surface with a rag, her usual tired smile fading as she caught the look on his face. "John, you look like hell. What's going on?" He didn't sit, couldn't, just stood there by the door, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets to hide the tremble. "It's Max. The dog I told you about. I need $200 to get him out. Someone else is trying to take him, and I can't." His voice broke, the admission raw, scraping at the walls he'd built around himself for years. "I don't got it, Marla. I've never asked for nothing from nobody, but I'm asking now. I'll pay it back, every cent, I swear. I can't lose him again." Her eyes softened, a mix of pity and something fiercer, something that saw the soldier under the broken man. She set the rag down, glancing around the near-empty diner, just a couple old-timers nursing coffee at the far end, before leaning in closer. "John, I ain't got much, but I can scrape together 50 from tips, and I know old man Carter over there. He's got a soft spot for vets, always talking about his boy who served. Let me ask him. Hang on." Before John could protest, she was crossing the room, her voice low as she spoke to the grizzled man in a flannel cap, his weathered face turning to glance at John with a nod of recognition. John stood frozen, torn between gratitude and the humiliation of being laid bare like this, his need on display for a small-town diner to see. When Marla returned with Carter in tow, the old man extended a gnarled hand, his grip firm despite his age. "Heard about your dog, son," he said, voice gravelly but kind. "Lost mine after Korea, never forgot him. I got $150 I can spare. No need to pay it back. Just get your boy home. That's what matters." The weight of the words, of the money pressed into his hand in a folded wad, nearly buckled John's knees. He swallowed hard, eyes burning, unable to look either of them in the face as he muttered, I don't know how to thank you. I'll make it right. I will." Marla just patted his arm, a silent, "Go on," while Carter waved it off, returning to his coffee with a grunt. John clutched the cash, the 200 he needed, plus Linda's 100, and felt the tension coil even tighter. He had the money now, but it wasn't over. Not yet. The other adopter, the paperwork, the system, every hurdle loomed larger as the final battle approached, the fear of losing Max at the last second, a blade hovering over his heart. He drove back to Paws and Claws faster than he should have, the truck's tires squealing as he pulled into the lot. The bell jingled again as he burst through the door, the clerk startled out of her phone scrolling by the intensity rolling off him. "I got the fee," he said, voice hard, slapping the cash on the counter. "300, call the manager. I'm taking Max now, and I got proof he's mine. Legal docs on the way. Don't tell me about no other adopter. This ends today." The manager emerged, irritation flashing across his face at the sight of John again, but the cash on the counter stopped him short. He counted it, lips pursing, then sighed, as if the whole thing was a personal inconvenience. "All right, fine. Money's good. But there's still the app, vet clearance, and I gotta check on that deposit from the other guy. I can't just—" "No," John cut in, stepping closer, his hazel eyes blazing with a fire the manager hadn't seen before, a soldier's resolve that brooked no argument. "You don't get it. That dog's not a transaction. He's family. I lost him once because I didn't fight hard enough. I'm fighting now. I got photos, tags, service records. Proof he was my partner in war. Legal aid's filing a claim as we speak. You let someone else take him, and I promise you, I'll raise hell till it's right. So you tell that other guy the deal's off. You give me the forms, you let me sign, and you open that kennel now." The manager faltered, caught off guard by the raw edge in John's voice, the desperation and determination woven into every syllable. Behind him, the clerk shifted uncomfortably, sensing the weight of the moment. For a long, tense beat, no one spoke. The shop's hum the only sound as John's gaze bore into the man, unyielding, a silent plea and a warning all at once. Then slowly the manager exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. All right, Jesus. I'll call the other adopter, tell him it's off. Fill out the damn forms, but the vet check's on you, and if there's legal blowback, it ain't my problem. Deal?" John nodded, the relief crashing over him so hard it nearly took his legs out from under him, but he held steady, signing the paperwork with a hand that shook not from fear, but from the enormity of what he'd just won, or almost won. The manager handed him a key to the kennel, muttering under his breath about difficult customers, but John didn't hear it. He didn't hear anything as he crossed the shop, each step heavier with anticipation, until he reached Max. The key turned, the lock clicked, and the door swung open with a creak that felt like a gunshot in the silence of his mind. Max stepped out, hesitant at first, his scarred frame trembling as if he couldn't believe it either, then pressed against John with a force that nearly knocked him over. John dropped to his knees, arms wrapping around the dog's neck, burying his face in the familiar black and tan fur, as a sob tore from his chest, raw and unrestrained. "I got you," he choked out, the words muffled against Max's coat, tears he hadn't shed in years spilling free now, hot and unrelenting. "I got you, buddy." "I'm so sorry. I'm never letting go again." Max whined, a sound of pure relief, his head resting on John's shoulder, the weight of trust and forgiveness heavier than any burden John had ever carried. In that moment, the pet shop, the manager, the world, it all fell away. It was just them, two broken warriors reuniting on a battlefield of fluorescent lights and linoleum, finding each other against every odds stacked against them. The dam inside John didn't just crack. It shattered, years of guilt and loss pouring out as he held Max tighter, feeling the dog's heartbeat against his own, a rhythm he thought he'd never know again. This was the truth he'd been running from, the truth he'd buried under silence and diner coffee and sleepless nights. Max wasn't just a dog, wasn't just a memory. He was the last tether to the man John used to be, the man who'd believed in loyalty, in fighting for what mattered, even when the world exploded around him. And now, holding him, John felt something shift, a quiet promise to be that man again, not for himself, but for Max. The forgiveness in those brown eyes, scarred over the left brow, told him it wasn't too late. They'd both been lost, but they'd found each other, and that was enough. Days turned to weeks, and Willow Creek saw a change in John Carver, subtle at first but undeniable. He still limped, still carried storms in his hazel eyes, but there was a steadiness to him now, a purpose in the way he moved through town. His routine shifted. Mornings weren't just coffee at the diner anymore, but slow walks with Max along Main Street, the German shepherd's leash looped loosely in his hand, both of them taking their time as if relearning the world together. He'd stop by the dog park he used to avoid, watching Max sniff at the grass with a ghost of his old vigor, and though the dog's hind legs still trembled with age, there was a spark there, a reclaiming of something lost. John worked more odd jobs, his hands steadier now as he fixed fences and raked leaves, every dollar going to Max's vet bills and better food, a quiet repayment of a debt he'd never fully settle. Marla noticed it at the diner, commenting on the faint smile that sometimes tugged at his mouth when he mentioned Max, and even old man Carter gave a gruff nod of approval when he saw them passing by, a vet saluting another's victory. But transformation didn't come without cost. Late one evening, as the Ohio sun dipped low, casting long shadows over his rental house, John sat at his small kitchen table, the manila envelope of photos and tags before him. He'd won Max back, but the fight had unearthed every ghost he'd tried to bury. The missions gone wrong, the comrades lost, the day he'd watched Max loaded into a crate, thinking it was goodbye forever. He couldn't keep running from it, not if he wanted to be the man Max deserved. So, with a heavy breath, he made a choice. He took the worn leather collar, the one he'd kept all these years, and hung it on a nail by the door, a symbolic surrender of the past, a letting go of the guilt that had chained him. It wasn't forgiveness for all he'd failed to do, but it was a start, a quiet renunciation of the weight he'd carried alone. From now on, he'd carry Max, not the war. Their new ritual came at dusk, when the town settled into a hush, and the pine-scented breeze rolled in from the woods. John would sit on the sagging porch of his rental, Max at his side, the dog's head resting on his boot just like in the old photos. They'd watch the last light fade, the stars and stripes on a neighbor's porch fluttering gently in the distance, a silent sentinel over a small-town America that had witnessed their reunion. There, in the quiet, John felt the ache of all they'd endured soften, not disappear, but become bearable, a scar instead of a wound. Max's steady breathing, the warmth of him close, was a reminder that some bonds outlast even the cruelest separations, that healing isn't about erasing the past, but about building something new from its ashes. And as they sat there, silhouetted against the twilight, a deeper truth settled over John, heavy with the weight of time and war. Life tears us apart, sometimes by force, sometimes by choice, but it also gives us chances to stitch the pieces back together, even if the seams are rough and the fabric frayed. It's in the coming home, in the finding again, that we remember what it means to be whole. War takes, but so does time, yet in the silence of rebeginnings, there's a strength no battlefield can claim. For John and Max, that silence was their victory, their shared breath a testament to survival, to love that refuses to be lost. If this story of loss and reunion, of a bond forged in fire and reclaimed in hope, has stirred something in you, hit that subscribe button to never miss a tale like this. Drop a comment with "I believe in second chances" if John and Max's fight touched your heart, and share this with someone who needs to know that even the deepest wounds can heal. Let's keep these stories of resilience alive together.